All right, I'm live. Let's see. So I'm going to be analyzing an Australian accent and some other stuff. Why Australian when I normally help with American accent stuff? I don't know, just for fun, something different. And I think it's actually good to sometimes look at other accents that are not the accent you're aiming for, because it can help you to develop more of an awareness of these little differences that are important for accent, right? If you can start to hear the difference between an Australian accent and an American accent, or different types of American accents, excuse me, then that'll help you actually achieve the accent that you're aiming for with more accuracy, because you need to have an awareness of some of these differences. If you can't tell the difference between one accent and another, you may have a hard time actually speaking in a specific accent as well. So I think it's helpful to explore accents in general, not just the accent you're aiming for, to develop kind of a deeper awareness and a deeper ability to imitate accents overall. Hopefully that makes sense. And quick plug for my mentorship program. If you want me to help you personally with accents, for instance, if you're Brazilian and you want an American accent, then go to accentmentorship.com. You can fill out the application for me to help you personally. All right, so let's dive in. I got this video here. It's a random video I found from a search on Youglish. And I don't know, I started watching more of it because I liked his accent and got curious about it. And then I started throwing some stuff into Google Doc. And I can show you here. So some lexical set stuff. You may not know what that is, but that's okay. Basically, it's like code words for different vowel sounds. So for instance, face, that's the lexical set, like code word. And it basically means there's this A sound. In my accent, I say face. So in the word face, it has the vowel A, that sound, which is really like two vowels, E, A, something like that connected together, face. And then price, that represents the I sound, which is again really like two vowels in my accent. It's kind of I, something like that. But here's the cool part is this changes for every accent, but you can like copy. How do I explain this in a simple way? Basically, these are like code words to help you map any accent you want. And you can sort of transfer these from one accent to another. So for instance, I can look at this guy's Australian accent and I can look at what his face vowel sounds like. So for me, it's an A sound, but for him, it's not that. It's something different. But you can sort of copy paste it into all the words where that sound shows up. So that's amazing. I think that's something that's really cool. It helps you sort of see the matrix of accents, and you can kind of learn any accent you want and break it down in a more intelligent way because you see these patterns. You see how to categorize sounds. So independently of the spelling, you start to see what are the categories of sounds, the categories for vowel sounds. So you can put a bunch of different words all into this face vowel sound category. And in this guy's Australian accent, I'm not going to do it perfectly, but it's instead of state, basic, awake, always, explain, face, his vowel sound there is something more like, and we'll dive into this more, but it's something like a, state, basic, awake, always, explain, something like that. It's not perfect, but you can tell it's almost the same thing every time. And that thing is different from my version of that thing. So each accent kind of has its own version of these sound categories. Does that make sense? So the categories basically stay the same, but the sound that we use for that category varies from one accent to another. I don't know if that makes sense yet. I'm trying to explain it. It's a really cool, powerful idea. Hopefully I'm explaining it well enough. If not, I can try it again. You can let me know. But let's dive in. Let's see some of this in practice. So
for a long time and a legal academic. I spent about 10 years.
So you can hear a bit of his accent. And it's funny, it's like a government video, productivity video, like I don't know. It's just a funny, like what some people would probably consider to be a boring video. But I think it's fascinating, even if we don't care about the content at all, just to listen to the accent and explore the accent. So it's a good example of whether you care about the content or not. Maybe you love it, maybe you don't, whatever. You can look at the layer of accent as sort of separate from the content. Obviously, it's connected in some ways, but even if you don't care about the content, you can still find value in the accent layer and analyze the sounds and try to learn the way that they're speaking, and specifically the accent that they're using. Let's listen to this guy a little bit.
Thank you very much for that introduction. It's very pleasing to be here. I love lecture theatres. My background before politics was actually as a Crown prosecutor and as a legal.
So yeah, it's so cool to me I would love to be able to perform an Australian accent, to be able to speak in an Australian accent, but not just like not good one, but like I want to try to actually do a convincing Australian accent of some sort. I think that would be satisfying for me, because most of what I've done with accent work so far is in foreign languages, right? I speak Spanish, and I've aimed to try to speak like a Puerto Rican in Spanish, and I've gotten really close. And then in Portuguese, I speak Portuguese, obviously, and I'm aiming to try to sound like a Brazilian, and I've gotten pretty close. My goal is to actually go all the way effectively. Maybe you can never get 100% truly right, but 99.9%, 99.99%. And so I love this journey. And I think it'd be fun for me to apply this to English, because I haven't really done it with different accents in English with the same level of depth and focus that I have in Spanish or Portuguese or other foreign languages. So this is me exploring that a little bit.
Legal academic, so
legal, and yeah, it takes practice. Just because I'm good at accents in Portuguese or Spanish, the ones that I've trained, doesn't mean that I'm automatically able to do a convincing Australian accent. Like, each accent that you want to learn takes practice. You have to break it down, you have to play with it, you have to get familiar with it.
I lectured evidence in criminal law 100.
Evidence in criminal law
100. So it's a
100. So
familiar being here, except that you're all
being here, except that you're all
much better dressed.
Much better dressed. So the cool part is we can start to break this down, and that's what I want to show you a little bit of here, to show you a little bit of how your brain can kind of start to simplify this stuff. So as I'm listening to him speak, what I started doing is I started taking some of the words he's saying and I'm putting them in some of these categories. And if you haven't heard of these categories, again, they're lexical sets. They're, if you just Google lexical sets, accents, for example, you'll find some stuff. You can start reading about it. There's a Wikipedia page. There's other stuff. There's some history to it. You don't have to know all of it, but it is a useful tool, especially if you're learning multiple accents or comparing one accent to another, or even just in one accent. Even if all you care about is an American accent, it's still helpful to learn a little bit of this so that your brain can start to put this stuff into categories. And you could, think of it as, a short I sound, a long I sound, and that kind of stuff. But I personally don't like those terms. I think they're confusing. And I don't know. The lexical sets are growing on me. I'm starting to prefer them. I don't know. I'm curious what you guys think. It's probably not something you've heard of if you're like most people, but I think it's a powerful way in. So for example, like the dress lexical set, some words that fall into that set could be step, neck, edge, shelf, friend, ready. So in each of those words, you basically, independently of the spelling, it could be spelled in different ways. What matters is the sound. You have a sound that basically sounds the same as the vowel in the word dress. So for me, it's like this sound. And this guy's Australian accent, it's something a little bit different. It might be more, I'm not going to do it perfectly, but it might be more like eh. Or it might be really like a combination of vowel sounds. It might be kind of this moving sound. So instead of dress, maybe he would say dress, something like that. I may not be doing it perfect, but look, we could go explore it, right? Let's go check. So for the dress lexical set, I wrote some of these: better, dressed, etc. Let's listen. He actually said dressed recently, right before I paused it. So let's hear that.
Evidence in criminal law 100. So it's a bit familiar being here, except that you're all much better dressed, actually.
Let's hear how I said dressed. I might have recorded that in Audacity. If I haven't, let me just start a new Audacity file, and I'll record him saying that, and then we can look at it more directly.
Criminal prosecutor and as a legal academic, so I lectured evidence in criminal law 100. So it's a bit familiar being here, except that you're all much better dressed, actually, than. I lectured evidence in criminal law 100.
So yeah, now we can dive into how he actually said that. We can look at the vowels a little bit more strategically in a more focused way.
So it's a bit familiar being here, except that you're all much better dressed, actually, than better dressed.
So I would say be, better, be, and he's doing be, be, be. I may not be imitating it perfectly, but it's different than me. Be, bitter,
better, better,
bitter, bitter,
better, better,
bitter, bitter.
better,
And then in dressed, I would say again, dre.
dressed,
And he did more of a
Re.
So maybe not but So instead of
Re.
dressed. Something like that.
better dressed,
Better dressed.
better dressed.
I'm not doing it perfect, but this is the entrance point. This is how I approach accents, right? It's not just about learning a bunch of random high level stuff. It's not just about learning the words like on a script, just memorizing the words, because that's pretty easy. The vocab, the grammar, the words. You probably already know how to do that. When we're talking about accent, we're talking about what are the exact sounds that they're using. What are the exact vowel sounds? What are the exact consonant sounds? And not just a big category that you're already familiar with, but creating new categories in your brain or retuning the categories and saying, oh, this isn't just the way that I'm used to hearing this sound. It's actually slightly different. Like for me, if I'm just hearing this with my American brain, maybe I say, oh, it's still an S sound. It's the word dress, but it's not the same S sound that I use. So in the same word, dress or dressed, he's using a slightly different vowel sound. And my brain could just ignore that and pretend it's the same. But what I want to do is say, no, let's pay attention to this. Let's try to figure out the difference. Let's keep an open mind. Let's have a mind of a beginner. Let's treat this as something new, almost like I'm a baby listening to it. Let me try to really figure out what is the sound he's saying for real. Re, 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 dre, dressed, dressed. And I could record myself and compare if I want to. I don't always do that. But especially if you're at the beginning stages, it's helpful. And even when you're more advanced with accent stuff, it's still helpful because you can think that you're imitating it perfectly, but still be wrong. Oftentimes, the way that we think we're sounding is not how we're actually sounding. And there also could be subtle differences that we just don't notice, even if we listen to a recording. But it gives us a better chance when we, there are various things we can do to give ourselves a better chance. We're always fighting against this, what do I want to say? This illusion of being right. It's easy to think we're right. It's easy to think that we're imitating it perfectly. It's easy to think that we sound like a native. It's easy to think that we're matching the audio perfectly. But what often happens is there's actually some differences that we're just not noticing. So we always have to fight against that. We always have to think, okay, I'm probably wrong. I'm probably not noticing something. What am I missing? What am I missing? And then we can use various approaches to try to find those hidden details. So one approach is listening to it many times. That can help. Another approach is hearing it from different speakers in different moments. That can help. Another approach is sort of increase your focus. So instead of just listening to a bunch of random stuff, listen to the word dress or dress, whatever the accent or pronunciation is. Zoom in on that word, right? Listen to just that word. Maybe you go to Youglish.com and you just look at the word dress or dressed, and maybe you even compare it between different accents. And you just go crazy on that word and listening to the vowel sound of that word and getting really focused on that. Another thing you can do is slow down the audio. You can do that on YouTube. You can do that in Audacity.
My 100. So it's a bit familiar being here. My students ever were, and most of you look like you're awake, which is also
awake. So when you slow it down, your brain has more time to notice each detail of each sound. So it improves the chances that you're going to notice something different. When it's at full speed, sometimes it's too fast and your brain is stuck on autopilot and it just ignores most of the details and it thinks, I already know this. I'm already good at this. But when you slow it down, you increase the chances that you're going to notice something different. Another thing you can do is use something like Audacity to not just slow it down and not just try to listen to one word at a time or something, but you can be way more efficient with it.
Dressed.
Because now I can pick just the word dressed,
Better.
or just the word better, or any chunk that I want. I can sort of increase or decrease the size of the chunk, and I can look at any piece of the audio that I want in a very focused, intentional way without having to listen to a bunch of other stuff every time. So it's more efficient. Dress. I feel like I sounded like I was Southern for a second. Dressed. Like that sounds more like a Southern US accent if I'm doing it that way. So I'm doing something different. I could try to explore that. What's the difference there? Dressed. Maybe it's going to a schwa at the end versus not going to a schwa at the end. Maybe that would be part of it. Dressed. That makes it sound more Southern to me if I'm doing something like that. And of course, I need to go look at specific Southern accents. I could be wrong. It could just be an impression that I have, a stereotype. But that's what it evokes for me. If I add that schwa at the end, dressed, or maybe even a little something extra between the e and the schwa, like if I go up further to or almost like a Y sound in between. I don't know. That's what evokes kind of a Southern accent feel to me personally. But if I don't do that, if I don't go to schwa, and if I just end up at that kind of sound, then maybe that's more Australian. Dressed. For me, it would be dre. For them, dre. Dressed. Dressed. And then as I'm looking at this sound, the cool part about this idea of lexical sets is, so for this dress lexical set, any words that fit into this category, into this lexical set, I can probably copy paste this sound that I just learned, this kind of sound. So instead of ever, he probably says eva. And I'm also applying some knowledge I have of what he probably does for like this sound at the end. Instead of maybe he does like I could be wrong. I need to check it versus audio. I'm guessing right now, and I should confirm that guess. But the more important thing I'm trying to point out right now is the first syllable. So instead of he probably does eva. And instead of lecturing, I'm guessing instead of he does lecturing, something like that. Lecturing. Instead of let, maybe he does lit. Instead of less, maybe he does less. Instead of percent, maybe he does percent, or something like that. Again, I need to confirm these things. I need to go check the audio. But using this idea of lexical sets, where I sort of break things down into these lexical sets, and I tune the sound for each accent for that lexical set, and then I distribute it to all the places where I think it goes. And then I sort of confirm that with the audio. But this is a way to kind of cut through the language, cut through the accent more efficiently, is to break it down into these lexical sets, into these categories, tune the sound for each category, and then distribute it throughout the accent. And you can do the same for an American accent, by the way. So I'm showing you with an Australian accent in this moment, partly just because that's something I'm interested in at the moment, but also because it can help you start to notice the difference between American versus Australian, or so-called general American versus some sort of Australian accent. Because as you develop this awareness of these differences between accents, again, that'll help you actually do a specific target accent more accurately, because you develop more skill with accent and sounds in general. So, for instance, can you hear the difference? That's kind of the difference between, at least my imitation of the difference between a general American accent versus an Australian accent, roughly speaking. So then in any word that should, fit into this dress category. So we could add more words in this category. It could be red, dead, head, said, bed, fed, led, There's so many words that we can put in this category. Anything that has this sound in my accent or in an Australian accent probably has something more like a sound somewhere in there. So now you can tune that sound, and you could look at, when you say the word red, what is your vowel sound? Because you might do something from Portuguese, by the way. Maybe we don't think of it as lexical sets in the same way with the same words, because these lexical sets are designed for English, not for Portuguese. But we can think of sort of a similar concept in Portuguese, right? You have in Portuguese, you can see my screen. Can I double check that? Yeah, you can see my screen. Good. In Portuguese, you don't think of it as lexical sets per se in the same way with the same words, but you do have these different symbols for vowels, and that's one way we can think about these sort of splits or categories in Portuguese. So these sounds I'm doing for the dress lexical set are in the neighborhood of these types of sounds that you write with the letter E or E or however you say it in Portuguese. So then we could look at those specific sounds. We could go and look at, okay, in your accent in Portuguese, how do you do these two sounds? And how are they similar versus how are they different to similar sounds in your target accent in English? Because here's the interesting part is, right, if you're just aiming for pronunciation, you don't have to get it perfect, right? You just have to get close enough to be understood. But if you're aiming for accent and you're really trying to polish the accent, you're really trying to do a convincing American accent, then it's not just about being understood. It's about tuning the sounds and saying, oh, maybe right now, maybe you're actually using your sound from Portuguese or whatever your version of that is. You probably say it slightly different from what I just did. I'm just trying to kind of imitate how I think I've heard it in Portuguese sometimes. So in a word like, a good word that has that sound. I don't know. Sobe. Is it that sound at the end? Something like that. But for me, I do I think in Portuguese it's slightly more closed. So I would do in English like dre, dress, dre, But in Portuguese, I think I've heard it be a little more closed, a little more close, a little more of a high vowel, whatever you want to call it. So instead of I think I hear like maybe sobe. Michelle Amaral in the comments on YouTube asked, what is the name of this software? Audacity. So the software that I was using just a minute ago, this software.
Dress.
Yeah, that's Audacity, and it's free. You can download it. I use it in some specific ways for accent training. I adjust some of the settings. It's not terribly hard to use it the way that I use it, but if you want, I can show you the exact settings that I change, what I recommend for an accent focused workflow in Audacity. So if you want to use Audacity to train accents, I'd be happy to show you how I do that. You can see some of it live as I'm demonstrating it, and maybe you can reverse engineer that. But if you want, I can also show you that. If you're interested, I can do that if you become a client in a one-on-one or group call. I also did a month ago or 2 months ago or something, I did a group call with my mentorship group clients where in 1 hour I showed them from zero, someone in the group who'd never even downloaded Audacity before, never used it. I had her download it and she shared her screen, and I walked her through all the way from zero, not even having it installed on her computer, to by the end of the hour, she was able to get audio from YouTube, get audio from her microphone. She was able to edit the audio, move it around. She's able to select things, imitate, sort of, zoom in on specific parts of audio, basically to do all the main tasks that she needs to do for accent training. So in 1 hour or less, you could go from not even having Audacity installed, not knowing how to use it, what any of the buttons do, to knowing what are the main things that I suggest for you to actually be able to use Audacity. Like you could be using Audacity for accent training in an hour or less. And obviously it takes practice. But anyways, if you're interested in that, that's in my course. So send me a message and I can send you a link if you're interested in buying access to that. You can, of course, watch my free content and learn a lot as well. So, but yeah, that's the name of the software, is Audacity. So anyways, though, in Portuguese, you have the vowel sounds that feel like home to you. They're what come naturally to you. And you may be using those, you may be copy pasting those sounds into English, and they may be close enough for pronunciation. They may help you be understood. And if that's all you care about, maybe that's good enough. And that's totally fine. But if you optionally want to go deeper and try to do a convincing American accent and get even closer, for whatever reason, whatever, everyone has different reasons for this type of, optional accent goal. But then it's about not just being in the neighborhood of the sound, but it's about trying to actually tune the sound to match the community that you're trying to integrate into. And you're trying to say, what is the exact sound that those people tend to do? And there's going to still be some allowable variation in that sound, but you're probably outside of that. It's sort of like a statistical, there's like a cluster. I could get too fancy in how I talk about that or whatever. Like, long story short, basically, you want to get in the window of like the range of sounds that native speakers do. It can still be a fairly tight window for that sound. So if you're outside of that window, you might not sound native. You might sound different. You might sound like a different accent. Maybe it's still, could pass as native from a different accent, or maybe it doesn't sound native. It sounds foreign. Anyways, so that's kind of a distinction between pronunciation and accent. Accent to me is about tuning these sounds. That's a key part of accent. Is a T sound is not always a T sound. An E sound is not always an E sound. It's about going deeper, opening your mind, almost becoming like a baby again, and realizing that there's really infinite vowel sounds. It's more like colors. It's not just this limited number. If you go to like see a vowel chart on Wikipedia, you can imagine there's this sort of map of vowel sounds. You don't have to learn the IPA. You don't have to learn the phonetic alphabet, these phonetic symbols. You can if you want, but you don't have to. What's more important than the phonetic symbols, and what I'm showing you right now, what's more important is this concept of the map. So it's basically this space that vowels live in. And you can imagine if I don't know which way I need to turn my head. I guess it's this way. You can imagine that you take this vowel map and put it, like if you sort of chop my head in half and you're looking at a diagram of my mouth, inside my mouth. I know that's kind of a gruesome image, but if you imagine that map sort of lives here in my mouth in a way. So it's sort of a representation of physically like what my tongue is doing. Where is my tongue located? Is it going up high in the back? In the back, is it going down low? In the front of the tongue, is it going up high or is it going down? And in the middle, is it going up or is it going down? And that kind of gives you these sort of dimensions physically of where your tongue is going in your mouth to create different vowel sounds. So if your tongue goes up high in the back, you can get a ooh sound.
Ooh.
If your tongue is low in the back, like when a doctor says, say ah,
Ah.
and that's why doctors say that, is because your tongue goes low in the back. So that means that it reveals your throat, what's going on in the back of your mouth. So if you say ah, you may not, like if a doctor told you, please lower the back of your tongue, you might not know consciously how to do that. But if a doctor just says, say ah, you do it automatically without even realizing what you're doing. So when you say ah, the back of your tongue goes down and the doctor can see what they need to see. If you lower the front of your tongue, and you may struggle with this as a Brazilian to do this, like these sounds here.
Ah.
Because you don't really have those in Brazilian Portuguese, as far as I'm aware. But these are important sounds in English. So, and that's about lowering the front of the tongue. And then if you raise the front of the tongue, you can end up with these types of sounds.
E. A.
And so on. So there's kind of these four corners of the map, and then you can fill in, and there's also schwa in the middle. That's an important one. So you have the four corners, kind of these extreme sounds that I showed you. So high and low in the back and high and low in the front. And then kind of in the middle, you have this relaxed schwa sound. And then you can kind of create, using these sort of coordinates, you can end up with, it's not just a limited number of vowels. It's really this continuous space where your tongue could move halfway in between these coordinates, or 20% or 21% between, or, do you get the idea? So it's more this continuous vowel space. I can go e, and in that path, I just went through a bunch of different vowels all connected together. It's not like it's just a countable limited number of vowels. It's more like it's a kind of an infinite continuous range. And it's up to each language and accent how it splits that range into categories and how it tunes, like what specific sounds it tends to use that can vary from one language to another, one accent to another. So that's what we're looking at for trying to match an Australian accent, an American accent, a specific American accent, so on and so forth, is how do we split up that vowel space into categories? And then for each of those categories, how do we tune that exactly to get the exact sound that we're aiming for? So if I'm aiming for an Australian accent, if you're aiming for an American accent, the process is the same. It's just the details that change, but the process is the same, right? So start thinking about what are the vowel categories, and then how do you tune that vowel category? So again, in an Australian accent, face might be like I, state, something like that. For me, it's more like a, state. So what we could do is break that down. We could also look at that for any vowel, but we could break it down and do a comparison. So I'll probably show you a quick American versus Australian comparison for one or two of these examples in a second. But just kind of the quick version is face versus face, dress versus dress, something like that. And then you practice that, you tune it, and you distribute it to wherever it goes in the dictionary, basically. And you practice that. You train to make it natural over time. It's not just this thing that you memorize and that's it. It's about creating habits so that this is something that becomes automatic over time. And there are things that Brazilians typically mess up, by the way, like sick versus seek. So that would be, which language is my keyboard in? Sick versus seek. That's really about kit versus fleece. So a lot of Brazilians, they try to do this sound in words like bit, criminal, inside, with, intermediary, simple, internet, in, etc. And instead of a sound, a lot of Brazilians do more of a e. So instead of internet, I hear internet, something like that, internet, instead of internet. So that would be what I often would tell clients to think of as like a sick versus seek distinction. It's the same thing as bitch versus beach, classic, offensive. You want to be careful which word you're saying, right? Or shit versus sheet. It's the same exact vowel sounds. So you put them in the same categories, right? So in other words, what we could do is we could say that fleece includes sick, bitch, shit, it, internet, etc. And then kit includes, I did this the wrong way, sorry. So kit is this one. And then fleece, that sound is seek, beach, sheet, eat. And then internet is not a word, right? But you get the idea. So if we do a comparison of American versus Australian, let's do that real quick, maybe for face and dress or something else just for fun, or price. I really like the face, price, and choice vowels in an Australian accent. Mouth as well. I don't know. Some of them just sound really fun to me. Like it's not perfect, but it's almost like you can, maybe that could get complicated depending on how I explain it. But to me, with my American ears, when I hear an Australian say a face vowel, state, it almost sounds like a price vowel to my American ears. And when I hear an Australian say a price vowel, to my American ears, it almost sounds like a choice vowel. So what I mean is I don't think it's really that extreme. I'm kind of stereotyping or exaggerating, but when I hear an Australian say face or state, to me, it almost sounds like they're saying like face, state, like using my price vowel. In fact, there's even a fun thing that is like a way to trick Americans into saying something in an Australian accent, sort of, is if you say rise up lights with an American accent, it sort of sounds like something in an Australian accent. So I'll say it now. Rise up lights, rise up lights. It's not perfect, but it gets me in the vicinity of saying razor blades with an Australian accent. So if I say rise up lights, and maybe I just slightly play with it, it's really kind of close to an Australian accent. So rise up lights, rise up lights, rise up lights. It's kind of like I'm saying razor blades with an Australian accent. Rise up lights, rise up lights, rise up lights, rise up lights. So that's what I'm talking about. Is it's almost like there's like a shift happening. Maybe there is. Maybe there's like a historical thing going on here, because I know this is a thing that can happen with accents. I'm just not sure of this specific case. But to me, it sounds like, let's see. I guess it'd be in this direction, like choice moved to where price used to be, and price moved to where face used to be, or something like that. Like Australian versus American, it's like some of these like replaced each other. I don't know if that makes sense. Hopefully it makes kind of sense. But if we want to look at it in a more detailed way, a more nuanced way, that idea of like replacing one vowel with another that we already know is more of a pronunciation thing or 80% like quick solution. But if we're really trying to get the accent in a convincing way, I would argue, again, we don't just want to do the 80% version. We want to go, you can start with the 80% version, but then if you're really trying to do a convincing accent, we want to go deeper. So what we could do is go look at some of these words that this guy said in his Australian accent, and we could go analyze what are the exact sounds he actually did here. And then we could look at my accent or another American's accent, someone with maybe a supposedly roughly general American accent. And what we can do is actually break down the vowel sound that they did. And it's going to be not just one vowel sound, it's going to be multiple vowel sounds. So we could look at the beginning, the middle, the end, and we can compare it back and forth. I think I actually already did that. I don't remember exactly where I did it. Here I had been editing the audio to pull out some of the price sounds that I've known people I've been. Let's see, which file did I do that in? No. Me talking. Sometimes it's cool. Oh yeah, I was pulling out my own I sounds, and then I compared it to an Australian, and that's how I ended up here and how I ended up doing this video. Is I was checking my own I sounds in my price vowel and all these words. So like something like this, sometimes so in all these something like I have an I sound in there. Sometimes so like the word sometimes, and then I can look at this and say, okay, after the T sound, what's the beginning vowel? Kind of a and then something like that. Might be hearing what I want to hear instead of what's actually happening, but it's something like I maybe slightly reduced. Maybe it doesn't quite get all the way to what I claimed it did just a second ago. Recognizable. So this is the word where I compared it to an Australian accent. So this is we're kind of reliving the journey I went on. So I was hearing my price sound, so the I sound, and I looked at the word recognizable, and then I went to Youglish and I searched recognizable and I searched Australian accent as the filter for the word recognizable, and that's where I found this video of this Australian guy. And in that video, he says recognizable in one part.
Barely recognizable as the.
So that's actually a different Australian guy, but there are multiple Australian people I listen to speaking. Let's see.
Barely recognizable as.
Maybe this is not Australian. Maybe this is British. I don't remember. Anyways, I was comparing versus multiple accents. I might be, forgetting some of the specifics, but that doesn't really matter. We're exploring this together, and the journey of exploring accent is not always this perfect thing, right? A lot of it is you don't really know what you're doing. You're exploring. It's an open-minded. You can have an orientation, a rough, imperfect map of where you're going, but the map is always going to be missing some things, or you have to kind of distrust the map and know that it can be wrong. So there's always, even if you kind of have a map to guide you, which is like what I help my clients with, is to save them time, to show them where to focus, where not to focus, you still have to kind of independently question things and be curious. And, no one can hear the sounds for you with your brain, with your ears. You're the one who has to do that. And you have to kind of control how you're approaching that. You have to, again, it's easy to think that you already know this stuff, that you can hurry and just rush through it. But if your aim is to do a convincing accent and an accent that's different than your accent, you really got to go deep. You got to resist that temptation. Sometimes to go fast, you actually have to slow down, because if you just go fast, you end up just repeating your old habits, your autopilot. You end up letting your brain do what it does. It does it very well, but it's not what you want, which is it filters out information that doesn't seem relevant. So it's going to filter out a lot of the sound details that you actually want to get the accent that you're aiming for. But that's where the kind of stuff that I help clients with, this kind of stuff you hear me talking about in my free content, you should see me showing you here, all of these methods, everything I do basically is about overcoming that autopilot that your brain is on. So how do you wake your brain up? How do you almost force your brain to start noticing, oh, wait a minute, this sound is a little bit different than I expected. That's the magic. That's the key thing there. It's just that, oh, wait a minute, this is a little bit different. Interesting. You see that little thread and you pull the thread and you go down the rabbit hole and you start noticing things that you've never noticed before. But it all starts with that moment of, wait a minute, what's that? That's not what I was expecting. Or maybe it's not even being sure that it's different. It's an openness. It's a curiosity. It's a, what if this is different? Maybe this is different. I wonder what would happen if I look here. I think I know this already, but let me double check. Let me just look just in case. And then you find something. Or maybe it's, I'm not sure if these are different, but let me keep listening. They might be. I feel like this one's a little different, but it's kind of hard to tell. Like all these things are part of the journey with accent. It's not, again, it's not this predefined thing where the map is 100% solid and you just already know what you're doing perfectly. There's some aspect of almost like being a baby, learning to talk, learning to walk, stumbling around a little bit. Even if you have parents or people to help you, people to guide you, they can't do the walking for you. You're the baby in this context. You got to try to walk. You're going to fall down some. You got to try to talk. You're going to make some sounds that are aligned with your target sounds, some sounds that aren't aligned with your target sounds. And all of that's okay. It's part of the process. But you're the one who has to do that. No matter how much you ask someone else or pay someone else or use an app or this thing or that thing. Like there's a quote that I like that is, babies are not better language learners than you. Babies are not better language learners than you. They just don't have escape routes. So you could agree with this quote, disagree with it. That's okay. I don't think that even matters that much, whether we, agree on the quote or whatever. It's more just the idea in this quote is a powerful idea that in some ways, babies are sort of just trapped, right? They're trying to participate in the world around them. They're trying to learn the language, and they're just kind of stuck in their own bodies that don't work that well yet. They're trying to figure it out. They're just kind of stuck. They don't have escape routes. But for us as adults, obviously the way we learn languages and accents seems to be significantly different. But I would argue that a huge factor in how successful we are with our language and accent goals has a huge factor is this idea of escape routes. Is that as adults, it's so easy to just avoid stuff that's hard, to think that we already know what we're doing and not take the time to try to figure something out. It's so easy to just skip over to a fun YouTube video about cats instead of focusing on the thing that we're trying to do. So it all comes back to this idea of focus, trying to say one phrase like a native, one word like a native, trying to analyze this accent,
Nice.
compare it. I think this is a British accent. I'm not sure, but let's see. So as an example, it would be zooming in nice, on your accent versus another accent, maybe versus even another accent for just, developing accent skill.
Nice.
So this is the word recognizable, the nigh syllable, recognizable. So here's my accent. Nice. Here's, I believe, a British accent.
Nice.
And you can probably hear they're different. Whether you can or can't, though, it's going to be valuable to sort of break it down. And this is, again, what I'm talking about, kind of waking your brain up out of autopilot, helping it start to notice these differences that it normally might ignore. Even if you already think you know the difference, go deeper. Challenge yourself to go deeper and notice things that you're still not noticing. For instance, that beginning vowel, to me, it sounds different. It's a little hard to hear. When you zoom into really tiny chunks, sometimes your brain can play tricks on you as well. So we'll make the chunk a little bit longer. I would say that the vowel I'm doing is more of like a na, ah. And the vowel that I believe British person is doing is more of a na. So one is more of a back vowel and one is more of a front vowel. Na. Does that make sense? So that's an important difference. If you're aiming to do either one of these accents convincingly, that's something that you want to train, is hitting that sound at the beginning of this vowel. And then as we keep going in the syllable, in this vowel sound, so for me, it starts here. goes here. You can hear it moving. It's kind of moving from ah to e, I, or something like that. If we look at just that part, we can tell it's not all the way to e. Or like I don't know, somewhere in there. We could try to be more picky about it, but it's somewhere in there. And there at the end, maybe it's getting closer to E. Maybe it's still not there. It's not E, it's E. What about here at the end? Yeah, so it never actually gets all the way to E. It gets to something like that. So it starts at and it ends at and then you can just smoothly connect those, or you could try to break down the exact path that it takes between them. But it's something like to I. And maybe in your brain you could think of it as aiming for E, and you just never quite get there. Maybe that could work. But you do want to be careful because we still have to look at what is the actual audio that's coming out. Because if you're getting all the way to E and native speakers aren't doing that, then your accent is probably going to sound different from native speakers of your target accent. So this is the kind of stuff I'm talking about, right? A lot of these details happen very quickly. And if you're just kind of going on autopilot, you may be missing some of these details. Your brain may be filtering them out. If you do shadowing, your brain, you may figure out 80% of this stuff kind of automatically. If you're really good at it, you might even get more. But there's probably going to be some sort of limit because, again, we have this built-in challenge of our brain has learned to filter out a lot of information. So you might think that you're shadowing or imitating perfectly, but the reality could be that that's just an illusion. You think you're doing it right, but you're actually missing something. So that's where this deeper accent analysis really comes in. So now if we, for instance, if I say not just my own accent, but let me try to imitate, I guess it's probably a British accent. Let's look at how that goes for this syllable. No. To me, it's more kind of like a schwa or centered or lowered sound compared to mine. Mine was more like and theirs is something like that. I could be not doing it perfectly, but so it starts at no, and it ends up at like noise, maybe noise. I don't know. And this is where sometimes what I do is I break it down into chunks. I try to tune the chunks. And then as I'm building the chunks back up into a sequence, sometimes I feel like it's missing something. It's missing a little bit of the magic, the vibe, the flow. And that's where sometimes I try to capture that with a bigger chunk. So I listen to the and maybe I do some sort of shadowing or imitation of this full, not just the individual pieces of the vowel sound, but now this kind of full connected section of the vowels that are happening here. Noise. Zoom out a little. Recognizable. So I'm already going to be, 80% there just from a quick shadowing or imitation probably. But again, if I want to polish this and really try to do a convincing accent, that's where let me go double check these chunks because I may think I'm doing them right, but I'm probably missing something.
Recognizable.
Recognize, recognizable. And at the end, he's not just doing bull because he's actually transitioning to a different word in connected speech. So I'm kind of cheating or doing something different, but that's okay. Let's see. Re. Again, in my accent, this would be what I think of as a dress vowel. And I would do like a re, most likely re, but he's doing re. It's a higher vowel, a more closed vowel, closed vowel. Re. Sounds kind of breathy too to me. Like maybe he's got some extra breath coming out. I could be wrong, but recognize.
Recognizable.
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 Let me check that ending. Yeah, I think I was doing something different. I'm not certain about that. Don't feel good about it yet.
Recognizable.
Recognize. Like maybe that sounds Australian instead of British. I don't know.
Recognizable.
The way I was doing it, I mean, not the original audio. Anyways, you're seeing some of the process. It's not instant. It takes work, but it works. It's real. It adds up. It helps you find things that you normally would not notice. Anyways, I'm kind of tired. This has been a little bit of a wandering live. We sort of started with an Australian accent, and I showed some specific things, some lexical sets, some concepts, talked about vowels and vowel space, or whatever you want to call it. And compared it a bit to Portuguese and talked about maybe comparing Australian versus American, but then I got distracted because of my audio. I had British, and then we were really doing general American, or my accent, versus what I believe was a British accent. But that's okay, because you get the point. Whatever accent you're aiming for, the process is the same. It's just the details that change. So it really doesn't matter. We could use any accents that we want. The process is going to be the same. And I'm showing you a bit of that process as well as a bit of the specifics here. So if you're aiming for an American sound on any of these, you could go do this right now with what I'm showing you here. If you're committed enough, you could go, if you want, download Audacity and be intense about it. I do recommend that, actually. But if nothing else, you can just start to organize your thoughts. Organize how you view vowels, for instance, in a language using the concept of lexical sets, and put things in categories and say, okay, let me go check the fleece vowels, go listen to a podcast and write down a bunch of words where, like I did here, where you're hearing that E sound in a general American accent. Or if it's an Australian accent, it seems like maybe it's more of a E, TV, legal, like it's more of a E instead of E, I think. Again, I'm just starting to explore that. Need to go deeper, probably not imitating it perfectly. But this is the process. And you can do this for an American accent, same as I'm doing for an Australian accent. You can also compare it to your own sounds from your own native accent. In Portuguese, most likely. I assume you're probably Brazilian watching this, and you probably want an American accent. I'm probably starting to repeat myself. That's partly okay. It's trying to kind of summarize where we went on this live. It was a little bit of a wandering path, but I think that's okay. Hopefully this is helpful. Let me know. And again, if you want more help, go to accentmentorship.com. If you want me to personally help you with accent, there's a service I sometimes do with new clients, or we can do it just that service by itself if you want, where I can look at your English, your accent in English, and I can look at these categories for vowels and consonants. It's not just what I put here, but look at what are the main categories in your speech. What are the main sounds that you're doing for each of those categories? And are they matching with the general American accent, or are they deviating? Do they sound like something different? And then I can, from that analysis, try to bring up what I think is the sort of the 80-20. What are the main things that I recommend you focus on if you want to sound more American? So a big part of that is just the vowels and consonants. That's not everything that accent is, but that's a huge part of it. And I think that's part of the sort of more resistant part, or the more obvious part for a lot of people. I could be wrong. Other people could disagree. Different people have different viewpoints on that. But I think that's a good entrance point, a way that I'm able to help people get meaningful results fairly quickly is by focusing on vowels and consonants. But then, of course, it's not just vowels and consonants, right? Accent is vowels and consonants, sort of one layer of it. but it's also rhythm. Spell that. Oh, word. Rhythm, stress, and melody. So the music, the language, the prosody, the whatever word you want to call it, it all means the same thing basically. So the musicality of the language, the rhythm, the stress, the melody, and that's sort of another layer. I generally think this is easier to learn with the right approach. Again, people could disagree, you could argue, but I generally think most of our effort, 80% of our effort, should probably go into the vowels and consonants and tuning those and putting those in the categories in a way that's more aligned with your target accent. And then the rhythm, stress, and melody is kind of the 20% where I personally think a lot of that we can kind of throw it in, we can kind of mix it in as we're looking at the vowels and consonants, as well as especially for the stress. Like we'll look at words where you miss stress to certain, put the stress on the wrong syllable, and that then can affect how you're doing the vowels and consonants as a result. But also, yeah, the rhythm and melody, the way I usually recommend working on that, a lot of it is just directly focusing on that. So intentionally minimizing your focus, reducing your focus on vowels and consonants for a moment, and then instead increasing your focus on the rhythm and melody. So like clapping with the rhythm of the syllables, whatever the sentence is, you clap or tap or whatever with the syllables, just get a feel for the rhythm. And you can also sort of sing the pitches, and you can use Audacity to slow it down and analyze those pitches if you want to try to figure out the melody. And that is a good exercise to do that because, again, you're on an autopilot most of the time, and the rhythm and the melody patterns may be different from what you would do on your autopilot. So if you want to learn some new patterns in this new accent, this new language that you're aiming for, then it's helpful to take a moment and consciously focus on the rhythm and the melody of a specific phrase spoken by a native speaker. With that said, I think that once you do this, you can figure a lot of it out on your own. That's why I put most of my focus on the vowels and consonants, because I think that's usually trickier. It's more resistant. Whereas if you do what I just said, I think you can figure out a lot of the rhythm and melody on your own when you practice what I just told you. So if you want my help with this stuff, personally guiding you on your journey from your current accent towards an American accent, whether that's aiming to actually pass as someone, thinking that you're a native speaker from the US, the so-called general American accent, or maybe another specific accent, or just getting closer to that. Maybe you don't want to or don't care to try to go 100% of the way, but you just want to go a bit further, get closer, or see how far you can get. Whatever your goal is, go to accentmentorship.com. If you want my help, you can learn a little bit more about how I help people, and you can fill out the application to work with me. And then based on that application, we'll figure out what the best next step is, whether it's just a single call. Maybe I do this analysis for you and show you kind of the main things I recommend, and then you can go work on them on your own. Maybe you can get access to my course, which is cheaper than doing, a mentorship with me, walking you through stuff live. You can get access to my course where I have videos that I'm recording, walking you through these things. And then you can watch that at your own convenience. Or if you want my personal support longer term, then that's also something that I offer. So potentially over the next 3 months or more, I could work with you one-on-one. Potentially over the next 6 months or more, I could work with you in a group program. There's different options at different price points. But no matter what your financial situation is, no matter what you're interested in, if you want to go beyond my free content, it all starts with going to accentmentorship.com and filling out an application. And then we'll figure it out from there. So let me know if this is helpful. Send me a message if you have any questions. And I look forward to seeing your application if you want to go deeper. All right, that's all for now. Talk to you more soon.